You've been doing it your entire life, and every time you do it, you lose a little more respect. You explain yourself, not because you owe anyone clarity, but because somewhere inside, you think it will help. It won't. The moment you start justifying a decision you've already made, you signal to everyone listening that you're not sure it was the right one. And they hear it. They always hear it. Watch what happens the next time someone questions you. You feel the need to defend, to clarify, to fill the silence with reasons. But that urge, that reflex to explain, is not confidence. It's status anxiety. You're trying to convince them you made the right choice, which means you're no longer certain you did. And the second they sense that uncertainty, the power shifts. You didn't lose respect because your decision was wrong. You lost it because you acted like it needed approval. Here's what most people don't realize. Explanation is not communication. It's negotiation. When you explain, you're asking for permission retroactively. You're inviting someone to judge whether your reasoning is good enough. And the moment you open that door, you've already placed yourself below them. Because people in power don't explain. They decide, and the decision stands. Think about the last time someone with real authority told you something. They didn't build a case. They didn't justify. They stated it and moved on. And you accepted it. Not because their logic was flawless, but because their certainty was. That's the part you've been missing. Respect doesn't come from being right. It comes from acting like the question was already answered. Now let's talk about what happens in your brain when you start explaining. There's a psychological mechanism called the over-justification effect. It's the idea that the more reasons you give for something, the weaker each reason becomes. You think you're building credibility, but what you're actually doing is diluting it. Every additional sentence, you add signals that the first one wasn't strong enough, and people don't process that consciously. They just feel it. They feel you losing ground. There's another layer to this. When you explain, you're not just giving information, you're giving away leverage, because explanation requires context, and context requires vulnerability. You have to reveal what you were thinking, what you were feeling, what factors influenced you, and all of that becomes material someone can use to challenge you. The more you say, the more surface area you create for doubt. Silence, on the other hand, gives them nothing to work with. It forces them to accept the decision as final or challenge you directly, and most people won't. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. The need to explain is not about the other person, it's about you. It's a symptom of approval-seeking behavior. You don't want to be misunderstood. You don't want to be judged unfairly. You don't want them to think you're unreasonable. So you explain. But what you're really doing is handing them the power to define whether you're reasonable or not. And once you do that, you've already lost. Let's go deeper. There's a concept in social psychology called perceived authority. It's the idea that people infer your status not from what you say, but from how you say it. Confident people speak less. They don't repeat themselves. They don't justify. They don't fill silence with reassurance. And that restraint is interpreted as strength. Because if you're secure in your position, you don't need to defend it. The decision itself is the argument. Now think about the last time you over-explained something. Maybe it was a boundary you set. Maybe it was a choice you made. Maybe it was something you said no to. And you felt the need to clarify why. To make sure they understood. To soften the impact. But here's what happened in that moment. You turned a statement into a negotiation. You turned a boundary into a suggestion. And the other person heard that. They didn't hear your reasoning. They heard your uncertainty. And they pushed. This is why people lose respect for you after you explain, even when your explanation is perfectly logical. Because logic is not the currency of respect. Certainty is. And the moment you start explaining, you've introduced doubt. You've made your position conditional. You've implied that if your reasons aren't good enough, the decision might change. And once someone believes your decisions are conditional, they stop respecting them. Let's talk about what silence does. Silence is not passive, it's active. It holds space. It forces the other person to sit with the decision instead of debating it. And that discomfort they feel, that need to fill the gap, that's them adjusting to your authority. When you explain, you release that tension for them. You make it easy. You do the emotional labor of justifying yourself. But when you stay silent, they have to do that labor. And in doing it, they accept your position. Here's the shift. The next time someone questions you, notice the urge to explain, feel it rise, and then don't. Answer once, clearly, calmly, and stop. Let the silence sit, let them process. If they push again, repeat yourself in fewer words. Not because you're being difficult, but because the decision has already been made. You're not discussing it, you're informing them. This doesn't mean you become cold, it means you become clear. There's a difference between being defensive and being direct. Defensiveness is emotional, it's reactive, it's trying to prove you're not wrong. Directness is calm, it's grounded, it's simply stating what is. And people respond to that differently. They don't argue with it, because there's nothing to argue with. You didn't give them an opening. Now let's address the fear. The fear that if you don't explain, people will think you're unreasonable, that they'll misunderstand, that they'll judge you. And here's the truth. They might, but they were going to anyway. Explanation doesn't prevent judgment. It just gives people more material to judge you with. And the respect you lose trying to control their perception is far greater than the misunderstanding you were trying to avoid. Here's what you need to understand about power dynamics. Power is not about being liked. It's about being respected. And respect comes from boundaries, not explanations. When you explain, you're softening the boundary. You're saying, I made this decision, but I'm open to being wrong about it. And that openness, while emotionally generous, is status suicide. Because the people you're trying to convince are not looking for reasons, they're looking for certainty. And if you don't have it, they won't either. This applies to everything. The job you take, the relationship you leave, the plan you change, the boundary you set. The moment you start explaining why, you've made it negotiable. And once something is negotiable, it's no longer yours to control. You've invited input, and input becomes pressure, and pressure becomes doubt. And doubt becomes regret, all because you couldn't let the decision stand on its own. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Someone asks why you're leaving early. You say, I have something to take care of. They push. What is it? You smile. Just something I need to handle. And you leave. You didn't lie. You didn't explain. You didn't justify. You stated it and moved. That's authority. Not because you're hiding something, but because your time is not up for debate. Or someone questions a decision you made at work. You say, I thought this was the best approach. They ask why. You say, because it aligned with what we're trying to accomplish. They push for details. You stay calm. I'm confident in the direction. And you stop talking. You didn't shut them down. You just didn't open the floor. And that restraint, that refusal to over-explain, signals that the decision is final. Here's the pattern you need to break. You think clarity earns respect. It doesn't. Certainty does. And certainty is not about having all the answers. It's about not needing to prove you do. The most respected people you know are not the ones who explain themselves best. They're the ones who explain themselves least. Because they've learned that authority is not built on justification, it's built on presence. So the next time you feel the urge to explain, ask yourself this. Am I doing this because they need to understand? Or because I need them to approve? And if it's the second one, stop. Let the discomfort sit. Let them adjust. Let your decision be enough. Because the moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment people start taking you seriously. You don't owe anyone access to your reasoning. You don't owe anyone comfort with your choices. You don't owe anyone reassurance that you thought it through. You make the decision, you communicate it once, and you move forward. That's not arrogance, that's clarity. And clarity, delivered with calm certainty, is the only language respect understands. Stop explaining, start deciding, and watch how quickly everything changes.